The Inspired Writer Podcast, a podcast that explores all things writing and publishing, from author interviews, insights from industry experts, writing tips, and much, much more. Welcome to the first episode of the Inspired Writer Podcast. I'm your podcast host, Naz Assen, and on today's episode, we're going to explore how you can turn your writing projects into fun games with self-gamification. And joining me on this episode is the creator of self-gamification, the optimist writer, Victoria Ikisley Bartels, who approaches life like a fun game. She is the author of 13 books, including Self-Gamification, Happiness Formula, How to Turn Your Life into Fun Games, and Cheerleading for Writers, Discover How Truly Talented You Are. Now, although not a gamer, Victoria developed the self-gamification self-help approach by combining anthropology, Kaizen, and gamification methods together. And you can visit her at victoriaikisleybartels.com. But in the meantime, welcome, Victoria.
Thank you very much, Nas, for having me. Hi.
It's an absolute pleasure. And I'm really intrigued by this self-gamification and how you incorporate it in your life, but more importantly, how you incorporate it in your writing. So how do you make writing fun?
I just try to see it both as a designer and a player of this game. So the first time I turned writing, and it was the very first activity in my life that I turned into games, was actually with my writing teacher and our mutual friend Mena van Praag, I was in her writing class, in her monthly writing class, and together with other students and friends, I complained that I didn't have time to write. And she said, you know what, let's play a little game and write just a few minutes a day for a month and see how it goes. Just that. And it was just amazing. And we commented in the Facebook group of our group, and the writing just started flowing just a few minutes a day. And then I forgot about this game, but later some friends from the Writers Club here in Aalborg in Denmark, where I live, they asked me how do I manage to do different things, like to write and start a new business and have a family with 2 small children. And then when I started explaining, I recalled of that game and suggested that to them. And I developed a point system to that, giving myself points for every 5 minutes a day that I wrote, and then counted both words, but also the points at the end of the month. And this is how it developed from there. So all my writing projects are gamified, so I turn them into games. And I adjust different details of the rules. Sometimes I give myself badges. Sometimes I give myself stars for different things that I achieve or make. And I also limit points to those that may be not productive or where I escape to. So it's really fun because, as I said, I design, or I treat it as both a designer and a player. So I treat myself as my best player, and I also treat myself as a best designer of the game.
Fantastic. I mean, I really love the idea of turning writing into a fun project, because one of the things, particularly if you're thinking about writing or if you're new to writing, actually, I've got to say, even if you're an experienced writer, one of the things we can tell ourselves is, I don't have time to write. And when I have this, huge chunk of time, I can sit there and write. But as you and I know, when you've got a family and with yourself, with young children, life intervenes and they're all in part of your life. So, your idea of actually you can do it a few minutes a day is just a really great way to start thinking about writing. And what I really like about what you were saying there is how you make these how you reward yourself as well. And I know you might not be an online gamer, but we all like to play games. So but also what I really love is the idea of how we escape from ourselves. Tell me a little bit more about how we can sometimes escape to or escape from, because that's one of the things you talk about in your books.
Yes, you mentioned at the beginning when you introduced the self-gamification approach that it embraces three approaches: anthropology, Kaizen, and gamification. And anthropology, I got inspired to consider myself non-judgmentally, to see what I'm doing, my thought processes, by award-winning authors and also our mutual friends Ariel and Shaya Kane. And they suggest something brilliant. They say, observe yourself as anthropologists would do, non-judgmentally. And they say that kindness and awareness is key. And when I did that, I observed that I wasn't treating my tasks as important, unimportant, or urgent, or not urgent, as normal project management methods do. I had difficulty to classify by them, but I noticed that I was treating them in two ways. I was either escaping them or I was running to them. For example, if writing a project like writing a book seemed to me like a huge project, and sometimes we do have in to-do lists, we often have a note, write a book, write an article, but this is such a huge step and it's really overwhelming for us. So what happens is then we just escape from that task to something easier, like being on social media, or maybe doing something where we can see results immediately. For me, for example, such escape to task is laundry. So I run away to see if there is some laundry to do or not.
I absolutely totally resonate with that, because I find, particularly as when I'm starting on a project that I've not done before, and a writing project that I find, or in my head I think it's quite challenging, I will find myself browsing social media or suddenly finding something else to do and distract myself with these other things like household chores, and I end up not writing. And the other thing I want to just point out, you mentioned Ariel and Shia Kane. Just a reminder, they are part of an organisation called TransformationMadeEasy.com, and as you say, their approach is definitely anthropological, and I love this idea of kindness, because there is something about writers, or the idea about writing, or maybe all artists, that you have to suffer for your art and it has to be hard. And I find often the harshest critics, I don't know if you agree with me, Victoria, can be ourselves as writers.
Yes, we are definitely our harshest critics. I absolutely agree. And what I learned also very interesting is that the fact that we escape or are upset with something is actually not bad. And also in what Ariel and Shaya Kane say, upset can happen, it's natural. But it's decision that we take, or not decision, but the choice that we make to stay or not to stay upset. And what I also learned, that is why Kaizen also very much resonated with me, and especially one person who is working, he is a professor at the UCLA, and his name is Robert Maurer. And he said something quite brilliant in his books, saying that if the small steps, because Kaizen is a philosophy of breaking everything down into small bits, whether it is a challenge, something to do, or a moment, or whatever. So you break into smallest and most effortless. So he says that if the small step that you have in front of you, if you resist this step, then it is still too big. And that was for me quite interesting, really perspective changing, because then I saw that if something I wanted to do just for 5 minutes and I wasn't doing, then 5 minutes were too long. And then I also learned from him something interesting, is that it is just in the structure of our brain. Our brains, human brains, have three parts. The middle part is reptilian brain, not the middle, but the base part. Then we have the middle part as mammalian brain. And then we have cortex, and cortex is responsible for our creativity, for our speech, for the rational thinking. But in the middle, in the mammal brain, there is a small organ which is called amygdala. And this organ is responsible for fight or flight mechanism. So if there is danger, in the face of danger, and we are reading a book, for example, but a car comes or a tiger, then the creative part is slowed down or shut off completely, so we can run away from danger or maybe fight it. But what happens is that if we have some wish, a project or something to do like writing, to write a book, it's so big, then the fear is actually growing together with this wish. But in that case, our amygdala is switched on. So it shuts off the creative part of or maybe slows down our ability of cortex to do something creative. So it means what can help is to make the steps smaller. So not to think of writing the whole book, but write a paragraph or sentence. Then the amygdala doesn't switch on. It just stays off because it's not that problematic to write a sentence. So
do you know, I find that so true. I'm starting. I've always wanted to write a fantasy novel ever since I was a child. And
oh wow,
oh yeah, yes. So it's taken me, and I remember I tried to, you know, start it in my 20s, and that you talk about this fear, which is there. It really is. And I don't, you know, I don't think it matters whether you're just starting out or you're an experienced writer, but whenever you try something new and something you hold, I think the more you care about something, sometimes the more fear there is, and perhaps the idea of not being successful, or if it's not being good enough. And it's so interesting that you're talking about this approach of Kaizen, because when I started writing this fantasy novel, I actually had to break it down. I had to break it down with just write the first scene. But you, as you say, you can break it down to even smaller. Just write the first sentence.
exactly.
And I often think, I don't know if you agree with me, Victoria, that actually part of this is a natural part of our writing process, part of being a writer.
Yes, absolutely. And there are many famous writers who say, I think Stephen King also said, when he was asked how he writes a book, he says word by word.
And I think that's absolutely true. You
yes.
have to
yes,
start
please.
word by word, and it makes it more manageable, particularly, and for me, it really got me going with the fantasy novels, that I just started to break it down word by word, and not being afraid of what you're writing on the page. So, I mean, you've written 13 books, and as you say, you have two small children, you also have your business. So, self gamification is clearly working for you. It inspires you. Tell me some of the types of games you might play.
Yes, but if possible, I would like to add to say gamification, why it works together really well with anthropology and Kaizen.
Sure.
You said about the fear that we have, and that is why what is very interesting about games. In games, the drama is not that big. There is actually no drama at all. But in real life, we see the projects really like defining our whole life, or maybe life-threatening, or if we don't do them or something. We put so much weight on those activities. Even if we don't write that book, we still might be happy, but we put the whole weight on our happiness on finishing that book.
You're right. We put that pressure on ourselves, don't we?
Yes. And in games, we don't do that. And if something doesn't work in games, and I like comparing it to a video game that like car races, you drive the car and you bump the wall. You don't sit there and stay complaining and saying, oh my God, I hit the wall. You just stop, you rear back, and then you drive again. And in games, we act in real projects, in writing, we could do the same. So if that scene doesn't work, we can stop, maybe go to another scene, or just rear back maybe 2 paragraphs up and see, oh, this could work differently. And if we treat them as a game, and it's possible because each project has the same components as games have. There are several things that we can do when turning into games. And the first one is willing to see them as games. Because as I said, projects have absolutely the same structure as main components of a game. And then we can also add some other things like similar, get inspired by games. That is why it is quite important when you turn your life into games to just see the games that you like or inspire you or that you play. For example, I watch my husband and my children. They are all three gamers, my favorite gamers. And I learned from them. I ask how their games functioning, what is happening there. So, and we play board games together. And right now I have on my table a board game description just to inspire me in some things. So games are everywhere.
I love that. And what's your favorite board game?
Oh, that's difficult to say. Right now, it's a dice game, which is called in German. There is the German title. It's called Nochmal, and it's translated into French, I think, encore, or it means one more time. And it's a combination. You have two types of dices, and you roll them, and then you cross the different combinations, and then you see who wins.
Do you know what? I've just had an idea about your dice game, and this is what I love about talking about games and how you can make writing fun. You could almost roll a dice to see how many sentences you're going to write.
Yes, that's a great idea. I'm going to try that.
Oh, fun. Well, I mean, and I love what you say about games, and you're right about games. Although I am quite competitive, Victoria, I do love games. And you're right. There's a fun element, a not so serious element to it, which suddenly makes I feel very relaxed. And when you're relaxed, funnily enough, that's when your creativity drops in and you get those inspiring thoughts or words and ideas.
Yes, absolutely. I liked what you said about competitive, and this is one of the concerns that I get from my students when I teach self-gamification, that they might be too hard because they would want to collect more and more points. So when they start writing, they will not stop writing. This is one of the concerns of my friends, writers also as well. They say, if I start writing, I cannot stop. But what I discovered myself is that when that happens, when gamification of writing works, it could be an idea to try to gamify or turn into life also your relaxing time into games. So praise yourself also, or give yourself points for taking a break, for maybe doing some yoga or meditation or whatever works for you to relax, go for a walk, but also don't make out of it a reward, even if it will feel like reward, but make a game out of it, also giving yourself points. And that brings the balance. And my latest, and you just asked me before, a little bit before about my motivational games, and my latest design, I call it the balance game. And it is about, I give myself 1 point per 10 minutes every day. And and I record which areas in my life I got that point to. So I have only 144 points, not more. So I get to see how I distribute it. And if I did something that I wanted to do, then I get a star, a badge, and so on. So, and that keeps in the balance. For example, on the work day, I have to do for the work, either it's creative or consulting work or any other administrative work for my business, then I have to have 20 points, it means 3 hours and 20 minutes at least to get a star there. But on the weekends, I should stay below 20 points to get a star. So I limit the number of points so that I get enough relaxation and time for my family and myself on weekends, and also don't escape maybe into household activities, but do the work on the weekdays. So this is this is what I love about self-gamification, because I am both a designer. I can design and adjust, how many points I get for writing and for that. And then as a player, I get to test it and see if it's fun. If it's not fun, then I adjust again. Or I can maybe add some more like some more motivation, some more badges to the player to motivate to do that. So it's really fun. I stop being a victim of something, but I start being very creatively resourceful, how to manage that.
And I really like what you say about being a victim, because sometimes when we are unkind to ourselves, I sometimes think it's an escape from our writing.
Yes.
It's
Yes,
so
absolutely.
easy to listen to that voice we have programmed in us to tell us about all of the things we're doing wrong and why it won't work and why we're maybe not great as writers and why we should give up. And that is an escape from actually taking that step and writing that first word or writing that second word. And and I just love this idea of reward, but also I love the idea of relaxing and the need to just relax and not be so focused, but because once you recharge your batteries, you can come at it with renewed energy. And sometimes, again, there's this idea about being a writer. You have to be working on your writing all the time. You've got to be consumed by it. There are so many different myths and ideas we have about who or what a writer is. And just to let anybody who's listening to the podcast know that, of course, if they want to get in contact with you, Victoria, they just need to go to your website, victoriaikisleybartels.com. So, Victoria, tell me about your top tip for writing.
My top tip for writing, and this is the first one, and it was before actually I learned about Kaizen and gamification. And it is also one that led one of award-winning authors in Denmark actually to get in contact to me and start playing the game, writing game. And she finished the book, so it was quite amazing. And that one is you cannot edit an empty page, or as Nora Roberts says, and she's my favorite fiction writer, she says you cannot edit a blank page. And this is just the most important, I think, for a writer. You just need to write something, anything. Even if the first thought comes, I don't know what to write, I suggest also to people who say it to me, just write that. I don't know what to write. And then suddenly something happens, oh, maybe I could write this. And it suddenly develops and goes and goes and goes. And it's just amazing what results can happen. May I say a little anecdote about that?
Of course you can.
I was invited to a creative writers camp to teach about creative writing and also what it means to write what we know. And I had this idea to get a writing prompt. So I looked online and got the first sentences of different books. And there is a book which starts with the sentence, I write this sitting in the kitchen sink. And it's a very quirky sentence. And the 25 people who were there were quite looking at me skeptically. But I said, let's write just 5 minutes. And we wrote it, and we read all 26 stories, and none of them was bad. All of them were so fun. Some of them were really funny and we laughed a lot. Some of them were very thoughtful and sometimes touched also difficult points or like different situations of what we face in our lives and so on. But it was so amazing, and they were all different. And that taught me, confirms just again and again that whatever you write, you just don't know. When you write, you discover something amazing and magical. And the writing process is it's both healing, but also it can teach you something completely unknown about yourself.
I find that really exciting, and I love that when I've come out with something that I never expected that I would have written. And as you say, it's a journey of self-discovery about yourself, and it doesn't matter what stage of the writing process you're on, or the writing journey. If you've just started, if you haven't started, if you're thinking of it, if you have been writing for a long time. And one of the things that I know that you do is that you coach writers as well. And if you can remind everybody about where they can come and access your services, Victoria?
They can contact me online on my website, and you can also find me on Facebook and LinkedIn. Just search for my name. The website address is ikizlibartels.com, but you can also find it by typing optimistwriter.com, and you will come to the same space.
Oh, that's absolutely brilliant. And I know that we are fast approaching the end of this particular podcast. I just wanted to thank you for taking the time to share your approach to writing, because as I said, I think a lot of writers, it's very easy to get disheartened or get too serious and escape from what you are really wanting to do. And for those of you listening to the podcast, I hope you've enjoyed this first episode. Let me know where you're listening from. And if you've got any questions, you can email me or you can access the contact phone via my website, www.naseemassen.com. I will put details attached to this podcast very shortly. And listen, if you've enjoyed listening to the podcast, do share it with your friends and your writing community. And you might have a question as well. So feel free to email me as well. Thank you for listening to the Inspired Writer podcast. And thank you once again to our very special guest, Victoria Ikizli-Bartels.
Thank you very much, Nas, for having me. It was a pleasure.